At the heart of this dramatic tale lies the theme of identity, prejudice, and power dynamics. The story takes place in a courtroom where a seemingly casual moment of mockery by a white judge against a black lawyer sets off a chain of events that shakes the very foundations of the courtroom's assumed power structures. What appears to be a simple legal confrontation soon turns into an exploration of race, history, and identity, as the lawyer reveals a deep and unexpected connection to someone the judge respects, one that will forever change the power dynamics between them. This story unfolds as a social drama, delving deep into themes of systemic racism and how assumptions based on race and status can be upended by the simple act of revealing one's true self. In the face of a judge's blatant disregard for the lawyer's expertise, Leonard King, the black lawyer, decides to take matters into his own hands, bringing forth a revelation that nobody in the room expected. The story will examine how one's identity can be both a weapon and a burden, especially when challenging those who hold power in society. This story belongs firmly in the drama genre, with elements of social commentary and thriller interwoven. It is a tale that pits an underdog, the black lawyer, against an antagonist, the arrogant white judge, both trapped in a system that is rigged in favor of those in power. The courtroom serves as a microcosm of the larger societal struggles for equality, justice, and recognition. The dominant emotions in this story are shock, empowerment, and justice. The story will evoke a sense of revelation, both for the characters and the audience, as the tension escalates and leads to an inevitable clash. Throughout the unfolding events, the audience will be drawn into the emotional roller coaster of the protagonist's struggle against a system that marginalizes him, only to be shocked by the truth that turns everything upside down. Leonard's ultimate empowerment and the dismantling of the judge's smug superiority serve as the emotional catharsis of the story. In essence, this story is about a journey from being underestimated and overlooked to claiming one's true power in the face of systemic prejudice. It is also a powerful commentary on how the sins of the past, represented by the connections and secrets between characters, come to light in the most unexpected of ways, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. The courtroom buzzed with a low murmur of voices, the sound of shuffling papers, and the weight of tension hanging in the air. Leonard King, a seasoned defense attorney, stood at the front of the room, his eyes scanning the jury as the judge, a white man in his late 50s, took his seat on the elevated bench. The judge's sharp suit and polished demeanor suggested authority, but Leonard could see through the veneer. He knew the man's kind, those who believed their power was unshakable, who looked at someone like him and saw nothing but the color of his skin. Leonard adjusted his tie, a small motion that spoke volumes to anyone who had been paying attention. To them, he might have seemed composed, cool even, but inside, his heart raced. Not from fear, but from the weight of history that had placed him here, in this very moment. This was not just any case. This was not about the facts. This was about something deeper. The judge's eyes flicked over Leonard, dismissing him before their gaze even fully met. He leaned back in his chair, the smugness dripping from his lips. "Let's move this along, Mr. King. I have a full docket today," he said, his tone oozing condescension. There was a chuckle from the bench, a small group of spectators at the back, who shared in the judge's amusement. Leonard took a breath, his hand lightly resting on the top of the table. His posture was perfect, calm, collected, but his mind was anything but. He knew what was happening here, the microaggressions, the subtle and overt dismissals, the way people like him were treated as though they didn't belong in spaces like this. But Leonard had learned long ago that to show anger, to respond to these small slights, was to lose. His voice cut through the air, steady and clear, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "Your Honor," Leonard began, "if we are to proceed with this case, I believe we need to address something that you've overlooked." He paused, watching as the judge raised an eyebrow. "I think you should know that my name is not quite what you believe it is." A ripple of confusion moved through the courtroom. The judge's smirk faltered slightly, but only for a second. "What are you implying, Mr. King?" he asked, leaning forward, his tone now one of mild curiosity rather than arrogance. Leonard stood a little straighter, his confidence building with each passing second. He knew that the moment had arrived, the moment when everything was about to change. "I'm not who you think I am," Leonard replied. His words were quiet, but they carried a weight that seemed to settle heavily on the room. And what you're about to learn will shake you to your core. The judge's face tightened. The room fell silent, all eyes on Leonard as he stood in front of the bench, a small, determined smile curling at the edges of his lips. This wasn't just a revelation. It was the beginning of a battle that no one in this courtroom, least of all the judge, was ready for. Leonard King had never been a man to back down. At 34 years old, he had already built a reputation in the legal world that many people could only dream of. A rising star in a world where a black man in a suit was still a rarity, Leonard had worked tirelessly to prove himself. But it wasn't just his work ethic that set him apart. It was the fire that burned within him, a fire that came from a place deeper than ambition or ego. Leonard carried the weight of a family's legacy, one built from generations of hardship, survival, and quiet resistance. His father had been a civil rights leader in the 60s, a man who had marched alongside the greatest activists of his time. Leonard's mother, a schoolteacher, had taught him the value of education and resilience. From the time he was a child, Leonard had been raised to understand that nothing would be handed to him. If he wanted to be somebody, he would have to fight for it, not just in the courtroom, but in life itself. His parents had taught him how to navigate a world that often saw him as less, and he carried that wisdom with him every day. But there was a part of Leonard that few knew about, a part of him that was buried deep, even beneath the carefully crafted persona of the successful lawyer. Beneath the sharp suit and polished appearance, Leonard was still a man haunted by the shadow of racism that had defined much of his life. The subtle slights, the dismissive looks, the constant battle to prove his worth. It was a weight he had come to understand and accept, but one that still gnawed at him. Standing tall in front of the judge, Leonard appeared every bit the confident professional. His dark eyes were focused, but not cold. There was a warmth there, a trace of something much more human. His skin, the deep shade of rich mahogany, seemed to glow in the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. His suit, tailored to perfection, spoke of success, but his posture, the way he held himself, spoke of something else. Leonard was not just a man in a suit. He was a man who had earned his place, a man who refused to be underestimated or ignored. His biggest fear was not failure. He had long ago learned to push past the idea of failure. It was something deeper, something more insidious. Leonard feared that despite all his accomplishments, despite the respect he had earned in legal circles, he would always be seen as less than. That no matter how far he climbed, there would always be someone standing at the top of the ladder, looking down at him with disdain. It was a fear that he had lived with every day of his life. But it was also a fear he had learned to mask, to hide behind the professionalism and confidence that had become his armor. But Leonard had learned to embrace his internal struggle. His fear, his doubt, it had become a driving force, pushing him to prove his worth, not just to others, but to himself. He had spent years fighting to be taken seriously, to show the world that he was more than the color of his skin. And while he had made a name for himself in the legal world, that fear still lingered in the back of his mind. It was always there, waiting for the moment when someone, like the judge before him, would look at him and see nothing more than a stereotype, a black man who didn't belong. As he stood in the courtroom, facing the judge's condescending gaze, Leonard's mind raced. He could feel the weight of the room pressing in on him, the judgment, the expectations, the prejudices that surrounded him. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he stood taller, his chin slightly lifted, as if to say, "I am not who you think I am." The world had tried to define him, to label him, but Leonard knew better. He knew that his true identity, his true power, was something that no one could take away. In that moment, Leonard wasn't just fighting for his client, or even for himself. He was fighting for every person who had ever been overlooked or dismissed because of the color of their skin. He was fighting for a future where people like him wouldn't have to prove their worth to anyone. The courtroom, once filled with an air of indifference, now crackled with tension. Leonard could feel the shift. Something was about to happen, something he couldn't yet name. The judge, his demeanor far too smug, leaned forward and motioned for Leonard to continue. His expression hadn't changed, but Leonard could sense that the air around them was thickening, as if the walls of the room were closing in. Leonard glanced down at his notes, his fingers tracing the edge of the legal file before him. But his mind was far from the case at hand. He was thinking about his father, about the stories he had heard as a child, stories of bravery and courage, of men who fought battles not with their fists, but with their words and their beliefs. Leonard had always been proud of those stories, but now, in the face of this seemingly trivial moment of disrespect, something was rising in him. It was the legacy of his father, the very essence of his being, calling him to stand up. "Your Honor," Leonard began, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of something darker. "I would like to request that we adjourn for a brief recess." He could feel the judge's eyes narrow, the arrogance flickering in the older man's gaze. "Recess?" the judge asked, his voice dripping with incredulity. "We've barely begun, Mr. King. What could possibly—" But Leonard didn't let him finish. He wasn't about to back down now. "I have something important to share, something that could change the course of this case. And I need you to listen carefully." The judge's lips curled into a tight smile, but Leonard wasn't fooled. He could see the judgment in the man's eyes, the condescension, the smug belief that Leonard had nothing to offer beyond the stereotype of an angry, out-of-place lawyer. For a moment, Leonard wondered if the judge had forgotten who he was speaking to, if he had forgotten the truth about Leonard's past. Before the judge could speak again, Leonard reached into his briefcase. The movement was deliberate, controlled, but every person in the room held their breath, sensing something pivotal was about to unfold. Leonard pulled out a thick, old envelope, its edges worn from years of handling. He set it on the table between them with a deliberate motion, letting the heavy silence fill the space. The judge's smirk faltered. He leaned forward, eyeing the envelope with a mix of confusion and curiosity. "What's this?" he asked, his voice now laced with suspicion. Leonard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he allowed the weight of the moment to sink in. He could feel the eyes of the jury on him, their gazes shifting between him and the judge. There was something almost sacred about this moment, the calm before the storm. Leonard knew that whatever happened next would forever change the dynamics of this courtroom. He was no longer just fighting for a client. He was fighting for respect, for justice, and for the truth to be revealed. He took a deep breath and slowly slid the envelope toward the judge. "Open it," Leonard said, his voice low but full of authority. The judge hesitated, glancing at Leonard with a mix of annoyance and curiosity. He opened the envelope with a slow, deliberate motion, as if he were handling something fragile, something dangerous. Inside, he found a single piece of paper, yellowed with age, but still legible. He lifted it out and began reading aloud, his voice steady at first but gradually faltering as he came to the realization of what he was reading. The words were unmistakable. The letter inside the envelope wasn't just any document. It was an official correspondence from Leonard's father, a man who had once been a key figure in the civil rights movement. The letter was addressed to none other than the judge himself, Judge Harold Livingston. The words on the page detailed a conversation between the judge and Leonard's father, one that had taken place years ago, when the judge was a young attorney and Leonard's father was a well-known activist fighting for racial equality. The realization hit like a wave. The judge's face drained of color as he read the letter, his fingers trembling slightly. Leonard could feel the shift in the room, the sudden, undeniable weight of the revelation. The judge had known Leonard's father. He had interacted with him, worked with him, and had even sought his counsel in private matters. But now, standing before him, was Leonard, the son of the man he had once known so well, the man he had once respected. The judge's eyes lifted from the paper, meeting Leonard's gaze for the first time without the smugness, without the arrogance. There was only a flicker of something else, uncertainty, perhaps fear. Leonard stood tall, his posture unwavering. "I think you owe me an apology, Your Honor," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence of the room. The judge blinked, trying to gather himself, but the weight of the revelation had already settled into his chest. He had been caught in a web of his own making, a web of prejudice, arrogance, and denial. The power he had wielded so easily just moments ago now seemed fragile, crumbling under the weight of a truth he had tried to ignore. "Mr. King," the judge's voice faltered, and for the first time, Leonard saw the cracks in the man's carefully constructed armor. I didn't know." "No, you didn't," Leonard interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "But now you do, and you will never look at me the same way again." The judge, for once, had no response. His gaze dropped to the letter in his hands, the words now ringing in his ears like an undeniable truth. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Leonard could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on him, but he kept his focus sharp, refusing to let the moment slip away. The judge, still holding the letter from Leonard's father, was struggling to compose himself. His lips trembled as he tried to speak, but words seemed to fail him. The audience, the jury, even the prosecution, they all watched in stunned silence. For a moment, Leonard wondered if it was all some sort of dream, a moment so surreal that it couldn't possibly be happening in real life. But the weight of the letter in front of him, the tension in the air, the way the judge's hands shook slightly, all of it was real. His pulse quickened, the adrenaline rushing through his veins. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. But now that it had arrived, Leonard felt a flicker of doubt. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about dismantling everything the judge believed about him, about proving a truth that had been hidden for far too long. "Your Honor," Leonard said, his voice unwavering, though the words that followed would seal the fate of the case and everyone in the room. "I'm not here to settle for just another victory in a courtroom. I'm here to settle an old score." The judge blinked, clearly still in shock, his face drained of all color. Leonard knew he had thrown the judge off balance, and that was exactly what he needed. This wasn't just a battle for legal supremacy. It was a battle for dignity, for respect, and for a reckoning that had been a long time coming. Leonard wasn't about to let the judge slip out of this moment without facing the truth of his past. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "Mr. King, this is a private matter," he stammered. "It has no place in this courtroom." Leonard shook his head, his expression hardening. "No, Your Honor. This is the matter. You've spent years judging me, judging people like me, without ever once acknowledging the history between us. The very history that you tried so desperately to bury." The judge swallowed, his eyes flickering to the jury, who were watching with a mix of confusion and curiosity. The air felt thick, charged with the energy of a moment that had the potential to change everything. Leonard's words had already started a chain of events that could not be undone. Leonard could feel the eyes of the room burning into him, and for a fleeting second, doubt began to creep in. What if this was the wrong approach? What if bringing this up would only backfire, painting him as a troublemaker, someone who couldn't move past the past? But he shook off the thought. His father's words echoed in his mind. "The truth is your weapon. Use it, no matter the cost." Taking a deep breath, Leonard turned his focus back to the judge, his voice growing colder, sharper. "For years, you've wielded your position as a weapon, just like the rest of your kind. You've dismissed me, looked down on me, ignored my intelligence, my work, my worth. You see me as nothing but an outsider, a threat to your power. Well, I'm here to tell you that I am not your enemy. You are mine." The judge's jaw clenched. "I don't know what you think this is, Mr. King, but you're out of line," he said, his voice regaining some of its former authority. Leonard stood his ground. "You don't know anything about me, Judge. You think you do. But the truth is that I've been playing by your rules for far too long. I've let you dictate how this will go. No more. Not anymore." He felt the presence of the jury behind him, their eyes locked on him. They were listening, absorbing every word. And Leonard knew that what he was doing, what he was saying, was something that would resonate beyond this moment. This wasn't just about him. It was about every single person who had ever been dismissed, disrespected, and reduced to nothing by people in power. This was his stand for the voiceless. The judge slammed his gavel on the table, his face turning beet red. "Enough, Mr. King," he shouted. "I will not have you turning this courtroom into a circus. Sit down and behave." But Leonard didn't sit. He didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes never leaving the judge's face. "You've had your power for too long, but it's over. The truth is coming out today, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The judge's face twisted in frustration, but the once unshakable man now appeared fragile. The room, which had once been filled with the predictable hum of courtroom routine, was now alive with a raw tension. Everyone knew that this wasn't just about the case at hand anymore. It was about a deeper battle, one that had been brewing for years and was about to come to a head. As Leonard stood there, the full weight of what he had done began to sink in. He had taken a leap, one that couldn't be undone. But as the tension simmered in the air, Leonard knew that he couldn't stop now. He had set the stage, and the stakes were higher than ever. He had begun to peel back the layers of the judge's life, and in doing so, had unleashed a reckoning that no one in this courtroom could escape. But Leonard also knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles, more obstacles, and even more enemies who would try to silence him. But with each step, he grew stronger. The journey had only just begun, and Leonard was ready to face whatever came next. The next few days were a blur of press conferences, legal meetings, and whispered rumors. Leonard had become a media sensation, the face of a legal revolution. The moment he had exposed Judge Livingston's ties to his father in the courtroom, the floodgates had opened. The press couldn't get enough of the story. The son of a civil rights icon, standing in the courtroom and confronting the very judge who had once worked with his father, exposing secrets that had been buried for decades. But as the media storm raged on, Leonard found himself becoming more and more disillusioned. It wasn't just the judge that he had to worry about anymore. There were whispers everywhere. Whispers about his father's past, about the documents he had uncovered, and the potential dangers that had long since been hidden from public view. He had hoped that, after the dramatic confrontation in the courtroom, things would begin to clear up. He had hoped that his stand would force the system to acknowledge the truth and right the wrongs that had been done. But instead, it felt like everything was slipping out of his control. Leonard began to realize that the stakes were much higher than he had anticipated. This wasn't just a battle against a biased judge. It was a fight against an entire system of corruption that reached far deeper than he could have imagined. Leonard sat at his desk late one night, the weight of the case pressing down on him like a leaden weight. His office, once a place of focused work, now felt more like a battlefield. Papers were scattered all over the desk, notes from meetings, transcripts from the trial, and countless legal documents. His mind raced through the details, trying to piece everything together, but one question kept circling back to him. Who was really behind all of this? Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. Leonard picked it up, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the number. It was from an unknown number, but there was something familiar about it. He hesitated before answering, his instinct telling him this was important. "Hello," Leonard said cautiously. A voice on the other end was low, almost a whisper, but it carried an undeniable sense of urgency. "You don't know what you've started, Leonard. You need to stop. Now." Leonard's pulse quickened. "Who is this? What do you mean, stop?" The voice chuckled bitterly. "You think exposing the judge will bring you justice? It's not that simple. You've opened a door, and what's on the other side isn't something you're ready to handle." Leonard's mind raced. "Who are you?" he demanded again. "What do you know about my father?" The voice grew colder. "I know more about your father than you ever will. You think he was a hero? He wasn't. He was part of something much bigger than you realize. And now, you're playing right into their hands." A cold chill washed over Leonard as the words settled in. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, feeling his throat tighten. "You think exposing the judge was your big move? That's just the beginning, my friend. The judge wasn't the only one involved. Your father, well, he wasn't exactly the man you think he was." The line went dead. Leonard sat in stunned silence, the words echoing in his mind. Your father wasn't a hero. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine, a feeling of betrayal creeping into his thoughts. The message wasn't just a threat. It was a revelation, a shocking glimpse into a truth that had been hidden from him his entire life. The revelation shattered Leonard's world. For years, he had held his father on a pedestal, the man whose courage and wisdom had shaped his own sense of justice. Leonard had always believed that his father's legacy was a beacon of hope, a testament to the struggles of those who had fought for equality and change. But now, he was being told something else entirely, that the man he had revered was entangled in something far darker, something that could change everything he thought he knew about his own identity. Leonard ran his hands through his hair, his mind spinning. Who had called him? And what was this something bigger his father had been a part of? Could it be true? Could the man who had shaped his values, who had given him a sense of purpose, really have been part of a system of corruption? The very thought made Leonard's stomach churn. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He looked up to see his assistant, Angela, standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, her expression tense. "Leonard, you need to see this." She handed him a thick folder, and Leonard could feel the weight of it before he even opened it. Inside, he found copies of documents, confidential records, internal memos, and communications that referenced his father's name. But these were no ordinary records. They were tied to a dark web of government operations, covert dealings, and unspeakable decisions. One document stood out above the rest, a letter addressed to Leonard's father, dated just a few weeks before his death. It was written in a tone that suggested urgency and secrecy, and it mentioned the council, a shadowy group Leonard had never heard of. The letter contained cryptic warnings and veiled threats, all directed at Leonard's father for reasons unknown. The air seemed to leave Leonard's lungs as he read the letter, his mind grappling with the implications of what he had uncovered. His father had been involved with a covert organization, one with ties to powerful people, to a network of individuals who controlled the very system Leonard had been trying to expose. As the full gravity of the situation sank in, Leonard realized that he had underestimated everything. He had thought his journey was about justice, about confronting a biased judge and standing up for his father's legacy. But now, he realized that it was so much bigger than that. He wasn't just fighting for his father's honor. He was fighting for the truth about his entire existence and the dark secrets that lay buried beneath the surface. The questions now loomed larger than ever. What was the council? What had his father been involved in? And who had called him that night to warn him? Leonard knew that he couldn't back down now. The stakes had been raised. What he had uncovered was only the beginning, and the true battle had only just begun. The weight of the documents on Leonard's desk felt heavier than ever. As the days passed, the pressure continued to mount. His phone rang constantly, the media hounding him for answers, his colleagues questioning his next steps. The unraveling mystery of his father's ties to the council had put everything on the line, not just his career, but his very sense of identity. Leonard was no longer sure what to believe. The revelation about his father's involvement in a covert operation had shaken him to his core. The man who had been his hero, his inspiration, had been part of something far darker than Leonard had ever imagined. The council, a powerful shadow group pulling strings behind the scenes, was more dangerous than anything Leonard had anticipated. And now, Leonard was caught in the web of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond his own family. The phone buzzed again, interrupting his thoughts. Leonard glanced at the screen and saw a name he hadn't expected, Angela. "Leonard, we need to talk," she said urgently when he answered. "I've been digging deeper into the council. They know who you are, and they know what you're doing." Leonard's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean they know who I am? How could they?" "I found a file," Angela cut in. "A file with your name on it. The council has been watching you from the moment you started this case. They knew your father's death wasn't an accident. They know what you've uncovered, and now, they're coming for you." A cold shiver ran down Leonard's spine. The pieces were falling into place, and the more he learned, the more dangerous it all became. The council wasn't just a group of powerful figures in the shadows. They were everywhere. They had their eyes on him, and they were ready to act. "What do they want from me?" Leonard asked, his voice tight with tension. "They want you to stop," Angela replied, her voice trembling slightly. "They've given me an ultimatum. If you don't drop the case, if you don't stop searching for the truth, they'll make sure you never practice law again. They'll ruin you. They'll destroy everything you've worked for." Leonard's mind raced. The stakes had never been higher. He had come this far, risked everything to uncover the truth about his father, to expose the corruption that had existed within the very system he had sworn to fight for. But now, the council was offering him an impossible choice. "They'll destroy everything?" Leonard repeated, his voice hoarse. "What else can they do?" "Leonard, it's not just about your career. They can take your family, your reputation, everything you've built. They've already put a target on your back. The more you fight, the more they'll come for you. They'll make you pay." The silence between them was thick, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Leonard had always prided himself on his resilience, his ability to face adversity head-on. But this was different. This wasn't just a case. This was a fight against a force far greater than anything he had imagined. And now, the council was offering him an impossible decision: stop his pursuit of the truth or risk losing everything. Leonard stood up abruptly, pacing around his office. His mind raced, replaying everything he had learned. What if they were right? What if continuing down this path would destroy him and everyone he loved? He had already lost so much: his father, his faith in the justice system, his peace of mind. Was it worth it? Was exposing the truth worth the cost? A voice in the back of his mind urged him to stop. It told him that it wasn't worth it, that the price of uncovering these hidden truths was too high, that he could walk away, let it all go, and live the life he had built, safe, secure, and untouched by the forces he was now fighting. But another part of him, a deeper part, refused to let go. Leonard had spent his life fighting for justice, for truth. He couldn't back down now, not when he was so close. His father had dedicated his life to the same cause, even if he had been caught up in something far more dangerous than Leonard had ever known. Leonard couldn't let his father's legacy be tarnished, not like this. But the risk of exposing the council, of continuing the fight, was immense. "Angela," Leonard said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I need time to think. I can't make a decision like this under pressure." "I understand," Angela replied softly. "But just know, whatever you decide, we're all in this together. You're not alone." As Leonard hung up the phone, a wave of doubt flooded over him. He stared out the window, his mind spiraling. The decision he faced wasn't just about his future. It was about everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in. Could he sacrifice his own peace, his safety, for the truth? And if he didn't, would he ever be able to forgive himself? He thought about his father again. What had he done? What had he been involved in? Leonard had always believed his father had fought for what was right. But now, the lines were blurred. The man he had looked up to had been a part of something far darker than he could ever have imagined. Could he even trust his father's legacy anymore? Or was he simply another pawn in a much larger game? Leonard was standing at a crossroads, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had to choose, sacrifice everything for the truth, or walk away and live with the knowledge that he had abandoned his father's legacy, abandoned everything he had fought for. And then there was the ultimate question that lingered in his mind, the one he had been avoiding all along. If he chose to expose the council, if he chose to fight to the very end, would it even be enough? Would the truth ever truly be enough? Leonard took a deep breath, the decision before him heavy with consequences. He knew that no matter which path he chose, his life would never be the same again. The days following the ultimatum were some of the hardest of Leonard's life. Every waking moment felt like a battle, his mind caught between the two choices, the truth or his own survival. He had spent sleepless nights weighing the consequences, tossing and turning with the weight of what had been revealed. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed that there was no easy way out. But then, something changed. The tipping point came one afternoon when Leonard received an unexpected call from a source within the council. The voice on the other end was familiar, gravelly, yet controlled. It was the same person who had warned him weeks ago, the one who had dropped hints about his father's true involvement. "Leonard," the voice said, its tone colder than before. "You've reached a point where there's no turning back. But there's something you need to know, something that could change everything." Leonard's breath caught. "What are you talking about? What do you know about my father?" "The truth about your father," the voice replied, "isn't what you think. He was never just a civil rights hero. He was more than that, much more. And now, it's your turn to take his place." Leonard felt a shiver run down his spine. "What are you saying? You're about to walk into a trap, Leonard. The council has known about your investigation from the very start. Every move you've made, they've been one step ahead. And now, they've set the final stage. All this time, you thought you were fighting for the truth, but you've been a pawn in their game." The words struck Leonard like a slap to the face. His hands clenched around the phone as anger bubbled up inside him. "You're telling me this now? After everything I've done? Because it's too late for you to stop now. If you try to back down, if you try to walk away, they'll come for you. And they'll come for everyone you care about." Leonard's heart pounded in his chest. His pulse raced with both fury and fear, a toxic cocktail of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He had been so close to unraveling the truth, to exposing the council's web of control and corruption. But now, it seemed as though he had been led into a trap, a game he was never meant to win. "Where are you? Meet me. I need to hear everything," Leonard demanded, his voice sharp. "I'll send you the location," the voice said, its tone now laced with something far darker. "But you need to be careful. The council doesn't play by the same rules you do." The line went dead. Leonard stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling on his shoulders. He felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted, that everything he had believed in was slipping through his fingers like sand. He had come this far, but the truth now felt more elusive than ever. He had uncovered something dangerous, something that could tear his entire world apart. But he couldn't back down. He couldn't let fear control him now, not when he was so close to the truth. Leonard grabbed his coat and headed out the door, determination burning in his chest. This was his last chance to confront the council, to expose the truth about his father, to take control of his own fate. The location the mysterious caller had sent him led Leonard to an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. It was a cold, sterile place, eerie in its silence, with long hallways that seemed to stretch into infinity. Leonard's footsteps echoed in the empty space, the sound of his heart beating in time with his stride. Every inch of the place felt wrong, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. At the end of the hallway, a single door stood ajar. Leonard pushed it open, his breath shallow, and entered the room. It was dimly lit, shadows cast long across the floor. A figure stood at the far side of the room, their face obscured by darkness. "Who are you?" Leonard called out, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. The figure turned slowly, revealing themselves to be a man in a dark suit. His face was partially obscured by the shadows, but Leonard could make out the glint of recognition in his eyes. "You don't remember me, do you?" the man said, his voice cool and confident. Leonard's mind raced, trying to place the voice. His stomach dropped as realization hit him. "You were at the courthouse, during the trial." The man nodded. "That's right. But I'm more than just a bystander, Leonard. I'm part of the bigger picture. I've been watching you." "Why?" Leonard demanded. "What do you want from me?" The man stepped forward, his face emerging from the shadows. Leonard gasped. He had seen that face before, on an old photograph his father had kept, one from the civil rights era. The man standing before him was someone his father had once known, someone Leonard had thought was long gone. "My name is Raymond King," the man said. "I was your father's closest ally, and I'm the one who's been pulling the strings all along." Leonard's world tilted, the room spinning around him. "What do you mean? How could you have been behind all of this?" Raymond smiled, his eyes cold and calculating. "Your father wasn't just a civil rights leader, Leonard. He was part of the council, the very people you've been fighting against." Leonard staggered backward, the truth crashing down on him like a wave. His father, his hero, his guiding light, had been involved in the very system Leonard had sworn to dismantle. "You lied to me," Leonard whispered, his voice breaking. "You used me." "I didn't use you," Raymond corrected him. "I trained you. I showed you the way. Your father's work wasn't just about fighting injustice. It was about power. And now, it's your turn to take the reins. You're the one who will lead this revolution." Leonard felt a surge of fury flood his chest. "I won't be part of your plan. I won't become what you want me to be." "You don't have a choice, Leonard." Raymond's voice turned cold. "Either you take control of the council's legacy and lead them into the future, or we will destroy everything you've built, everything you love." The ultimatum was clear: accept the council's twisted vision and claim his place at the top, or lose everything. Leonard's breath caught in his throat. He had been brought here, to this moment, only to find that the fight for justice wasn't as simple as he had thought. It wasn't about right and wrong, good and evil. It was about power, control, and manipulation. Leonard's hands balled into fists. The choice before him was clear, but it was anything but simple. The weight of his father's legacy was on his shoulders, and now, he had to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. The room felt suffocating, as though every breath Leonard took was heavy with the weight of his choices. Raymond King's cold eyes bore into him, but Leonard's resolve remained unshaken. The words, "either join us or lose everything," rang in his ears, but they no longer held the power they once had. Leonard's mind raced. The power that Raymond offered him, the legacy of the council, the potential to reshape history, was intoxicating. But at what cost? His entire life had been built on principles of justice, truth, and the pursuit of right. The legacy of his father, once a beacon of hope, had been tainted by the same corrupt system Leonard had sworn to dismantle. This was a system that played people like pawns, manipulating them for personal gain, and Leonard was being asked to carry that torch. "I won't lead them," Leonard finally said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I won't become what they want me to be." Raymond's face twisted with frustration, his calm demeanor faltering. "You think you have a choice? Do you think you can just walk away from this and live a normal life? No, you are tied to this, whether you like it or not. Your father made sure of it. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about everything he worked for. The words stung. They felt like a slap in the face, but Leonard stood his ground. My father's legacy isn't about power. It was about fighting for what's right. It was about standing up against corruption and injustice. I won't dishonor his memory by becoming a part of this. Raymond's eyes narrowed, calculating, as though weighing the impact of Leonard's defiance. You're making a mistake, Leonard. You'll regret this. Leonard's heart thundered in his chest, but he felt a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. This was his moment, his chance to reclaim his own path and free himself from the chains of his father's shadow. He had fought too hard, uncovered too much, to let fear dictate his actions now. I'm not afraid of you, Leonard said firmly, his voice growing louder, more resolute. And I'm not afraid of the council. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silent space. As he reached the door, he paused, glancing back one last time at Raymond King. The council will fall, Leonard said, his words firm and final. And it won't be because of me. It'll be because of people like you. People who believe that power can buy everything. But power without integrity, without truth, is nothing. He stepped out of the building, the cool night air hitting his face, a reminder that the fight was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Leonard felt free. Free from the expectations of the council, free from the manipulations that had plagued his life. The burden of his father's legacy no longer weighed on him. Instead, Leonard felt a newfound sense of agency, a belief that he could create his own path forward. As he walked away from the building, his phone buzzed again. It was Angela. Leonard, she said, her voice strained. They've made their move. They're coming after you. Leonard's pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. Let them come. I've made my decision. You're sure? Angela asked, her tone both worried and supportive. I'm sure, Leonard said. It's time to fight for the truth, not just for me, but for everyone. With those words, he ended the call and continued walking, the weight of the decision still heavy but no longer crushing. The world outside had changed, and so had he. There would be battles ahead, the road would be hard, and the council wouldn't give up easily. But Leonard knew he had made the right choice. The truth was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. In the distance, he could see the bright lights of the city, the skyline that once felt like a symbol of ambition, now a symbol of the freedom he had just claimed. The road ahead was uncertain, and the dangers were still very real, but Leonard had a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer feared the shadow of the council or the lies that had been woven around him. He would bring the truth to light, no matter the consequences. He would fight for justice, not just for his father, but for the people whose voices had been silenced for far too long. And in the end, he would be free, not just from the council's influence, but from the chains of his own doubt. The fight was far from over, but Leonard was no longer alone. He had allies, he had the truth on his side, and that, more than anything else, was enough to give him hope.